Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined by JJ and Chris Ducart and Brian Clary. We are off and running. It is pre-rut here in the upper Midwest, and bucks are hitting the ground. We have some success stories to talk about. If you're watching the podcast on YouTube, you'll see there's a big buck sitting right here on the table. So a couple good success stories for you right away. And we're just going to talk strategy. We're going to talk time of year, what bucks are doing, plans coming up for the next couple weeks, and kind of all things pre-rut and rut. So, you know, here in the upper Midwest, we're finally getting fired up, right? Bucks are starting to show up more. They're hitting scrapes. There's a little bit of chasing going on. Bigger bucks are starting to show up more and are going to start daylighting more. And obviously some success here on the table. So let's start off with that. So JJ, this buck that's on the table in front of us, tell me a story.
Well, I'll say this. There should be two bucks laying on the table. We haven't actually seen Brian's rack yet, so, you know, if I hadn't seen the footage, I'd maybe think you just photoshopped that one, but no, two bucks are down. Yours was first. What were you, 16th, or what was the date?
That's a good question. I think it was like the 16th, yep.
So basically October lull, in quotes, air quotes.
It was the 17th, I stand corrected.
17th, and I shot mine 21st. So you actually had some pretty good weather, kind of more strategy, like, you know, pretty solid hunt, hanging hunt, went in after him, got some information, and you can talk a little bit about that. And I'm just going to flip that and say, I was hunting warm weather, didn't have a lot of intel, and got lucky. We'll say that. Got real tight. This buck was 70 yards away when I got to the stand. He was coughing in some pine trees. So I knew I was real tight to him. And honestly, just being that close to him is the reason I got him. It's not so much on weather or time of the year. Like it was just kind of a crazy deal, like a 3-hour season. Obviously, I knew the deer really liked that area, and we can kind of break down what that looked like. But I feel like my chances of shooting a deer that night were super low, and yours with that high pressure, that cold front, like actually a really good night. So kind of two different variables, but we can break them down a little bit today, or just wait for hunt breakdowns too. But yeah. Andre the Giant is the buck that I shot. Wisconsin 5-year-old. We'll confirm that with the teeth. We've talked about him in the past on some of the aging ones, aging podcasts, super heavy mass, like just kind of ridiculous mass, and body was over 300-pound live weight. So just kind of a freak, big deer. Yeah, if you're watching, you get a good look. Chocolate horns, just a really cool buck. And that's what I'll say about that. But yeah, so we're kind of coming out of that October lull. And into pre-rut, maybe you want to hit on your buck a little bit before we get into pre-rut tactics and strategies.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, I mean, that's a stud. That's a cool deer. You know, it's interesting because you had a lot of history with that deer. The last couple of years, you picked up a shed off of him, and you obviously called him Andre the Giant. I think we should talk about that a little bit because it's kind of cool. Like this deer, you called him Andre the Giant because he's a giant rack deer, but for really a different reason, right? So when this deer came in, you know, and would be on the reveal cameras on a scrape, I mean, he stood higher than any other deer on that farm, like by a lot. It wasn't even close. And it was cool that you kind of did some layovers and with different deer in the same frame, like at different times, so it laid them over into one kind of sequence. And yeah, so cool. I mean, how much did that deer weigh? How big was he? As big once you got him on the ground as you thought he was on the hoof?
Well, the weird thing is, so I got a bunch of footage of him from different angles. I think I was running 3 Tacticams and the big camera, and the reveal even caught a little clip. But like, when we watch the footage, he looks like a 120-inch 8-pointer, you know, because the ratios are just so wacky with this deer. But yeah, his body was so big. Didn't look that big walking in, really. But then when you go up to him and lay your hands on him, yeah, the body was huge. I think it kind of hurt my back and pulled a chest muscle or something, dragging him out. So it was sore for a couple of days. But yeah, really big deer. I think, you know, calculated at somewhere around 300, a little over 300-pound live weight. Just went off Google on that. I don't know how else to do it because I weighed him after we gutted him and stuff, and he was like 245. So still big, still dressed, and then tried to calculate back up to what he was. Yeah, just massive deer, long body, huge head. Like you can see the bases, you know, the width between the bases of his antlers. So just kind of a freakish deer, and it's gonna be a really sweet breakdown, all those different aspects of the deer and the history, and comparing him to other bucks in his age class. And yeah, just kind of breaking down the whole strategy, because there's a lot to it that's kind of unique, I would say. And he had some injuries on his back. I think he'd been fighting. The other 5-year-old disappeared. He had some puncture wounds on his back. Seemed like he kind of took over the area. So it was that beginning of, really setting that pecking order coming into pre-rut.
Right on, yeah, super massive. Like he carries that mass all through his beams. Like that's a super cool deer. Almost looks like a Canadian deer, dark chocolate rack.
Yeah, what was like one of your biggest mass measurements on that?
Yeah, not quite 6, but like 5 3/4, something like that.
I mean,
that's between the 2 and the 3. So that's the third mass measurement. It's up there a ways. Yeah, you're 5 or above all the way through, and then 2.5, 3 up here at the top.
Yeah, so that's a big body if it's making something with that kind of mass look like 120 some inch deer,
Right?
On
sure.
hoof,
Yep. Yep. Well, yeah, a lot of success going on. So if we want to dive into mine a little bit, so it was October 17th. I shot mine. Had some reveal pictures of 2 or 3 bucks that I wanted to target, and we had this cold front blowing through, and it was kind of the end of that cold front. But it was that last day, and the pressure was starting to come back up, and it was sunny, windy, super windy, but it was cool. And interestingly enough, on that farm that I hunt, they had just took all the crops off. So a lot of standing beans up there were now gone. The group of us we paid the farmer to leave an acre standing in this one kind of secluded spot. And it was interesting when I approached that hunt that night, I was trying to decide. I had a reveal set up probably 500 yards away from where these standing beans were, kind of in a different inside corner of a field, and those beans all got picked. But I still had some deer action coming out there, and pretty regular. And lo and behold, that deer that I ended up shooting came out there where my camera was the night before. So October 16th, he comes out right at last light, still daylight to shoot. He came out there where there was no standing beans. And so I had a decision. My gut was telling me that I needed to be in this spot by the standing beans. Deer aren't really flocking to those standing beans right now, but it was still a food source. But we had some intel that the 2 target bucks, the top 2, were over there. Lance had been over there the week before and filmed them both where those standing beans were now. And it was like, okay, do I chase that picture? And we talk about this a lot, So I knew that this big buck had come out, 500 yards away there the night previously. So looking at it very simply, it's like, okay, well, I should go sit there because the deer daylighted there last night, and we've had a big one daylight there, 3 out of the last 6 nights. But I just had this feeling that I had to be over where those standing beans were. So in doing that, I looked at where our stand was and now where the standing beans were, where Lance had filmed these bucks, the week before, and where they were kind of coming out. They're coming out of the woods, and there's a finger of field that runs down that's got tall grass, and they would kind of work through that either direction, and they'd work the wood line around there. And where that stand sat, it was about, I figured if the deer came by, there was going to be a 50-yard shot probably. Now, I'm comfortable shooting that far if I have to. I don't like to shoot that far. But it was super windy. This is like the one night I had to hunt, and I knew the conditions were right. And I said to Connor, who was filming me that night, I said, man, I don't feel comfortable shooting that far in this wind. I said, but we're going to drive up there. We took 2 stands with. We got to a point where we could get up to the top of the hill, and I could glass with my binoculars that tree line. And I said, if I see a tree in there that I think we can simply slip in there and hang and hunt, we're going to do it. And it was just one of those things, you hear these big buck killers talk about it all the time, Rising and all these guys, that it's like, be cautious when you hunt, but like when it's time to get off the sidelines and get in the game, like you just go with that instinct and you do it. And so that's going through my head. And we get up there and I glassed up this tree and I'm like, that's the tree we need to be in. And Connor's kind of looking at me like, so you want to go in there right now? It's 2:00 and hang a stand and hunt. And I'm like, yep. And we had a strong wind. It was a perfect scenario. So we slipped in there and hung the stand and got in it. Now we had a straight north wind, and the wind was blowing straight because it was a strong wind, and it was blowing out towards the field, which there was that acre of standing beans there. And I knew that we were going to be okay until deer got, right in front of us, right? So we were gambling a little bit with the wind. I didn't want to blow him back into the woods to the bedding, but so it's kind of a gamble. But I thought, okay, if a big buck is walking down this edge, I can have him killed before he gets right in front of me and gets my wind. So we get up there, and again, so the plan was to hang and hunt, go away from the previous intel that was 500 yards away, still close, but away from that camera. Don't chase the picture. Go with the instinct. So we sat there, and we weren't sitting there 20 minutes, and a doe came out right below us, and she's feeding in the beans right in front of us, right downwind, and we're passing the test. So that was great. We phased up when we got in there, and she's out there, moves on. 2 more does came from the west, started feeding out in front of us, passing the test still. A little bit later, 3 more does come out from right below the tree stand, excuse me, and it kind of drops off below us. And those 3 does came up. They got out in the field. Now there's 5 does out there. They're all downwind, and they're starting to figure it out a little bit. Like, they can't get us nailed, but like the wind's blowing directly at them, throwing wind floaters, and like you can see it's going right at them. Not blowing, not getting out of there, but they'd pick their head up and they'd smell and go back to feeding. Well, they're out there for about, 10, 15 minutes, and I hear that classic walk, right? So as a hunter, and you've heard it, and it's pretty distinct. It's that big buck walk. When they walk through the woods, they kind of drag their feet. And I heard that, and I actually looked behind me, and like through Connor's legs, I could see this big 6-point side coming through the woods. And I knew what deer it was right away. I knew it was this 6x5. We call him Swoops because his beams kind of swoop around. And he's walking 15 yards behind our tree. And at that point, we couldn't move and couldn't do anything. The deer's 15 yards away, and he's kind of paralleling the field. But like we had to stay put because those does are right in front of us. He's right there. We're just kind of pinned down. So he circles up, and he's 30 yards now, and he gets 5 yards from the edge of the field, and he stops and he stands there, and he's just looking at these does. And we had a standoff, and this went on for, I thought it was 20 some minutes. I think the camera, from the footage, it was like 15 minutes. He stands there and just watches. And these does this whole time are starting to get a little jiggy. They're trying to get our wind, but they have no idea we're there, and they can't detect it. Like, they can't figure out what it is. Then they're looking at this buck, and you know how does are when a big buck comes. And so like now they're 10 yards and he's 30, and we're just waiting to see what happens. Well, finally, like, we passed the test enough to get that buck. He finally commits, and he steps out into the field. Now, where he steps out into the field, I can't shoot him because, again, this is a hang and hunt. Like, we didn't do a ton of trimming. Steps out in the field. Well, as he steps out in the field, those does run back in the woods right below us, which really was the best thing that could have happened. And at that point, I knew, like, okay, he's either going to go east or he's going to go west. If he comes east, got him. Or I was going to have an opportunity. And sure enough, he fed there for 30 seconds, and he turned and walked right down the wood line to us. And that was it, like 15 yards, history. And it was pretty cool. We had 4 different angles, I think, running. So some really cool stuff, really tight, good looking stuff with the buck, and then an overhead angle above him or above me, so you can see kind of the whole perspective. Shot him, and he ran, and I watched him fall over. Just a cool deer. He was a 6x5. He was a little weak on his right side. His left side was giant. His left side was actually almost 80. It was over 80. And he ended up scoring 167 and 2/8. But cool deer, cool hunt. It's one of those things where, you go with your instinct. You get all this intel, and that intel is great. But, it was just an instinct of where I had to be and using that wind to go in and slip in, hang and hunt, get off the sidelines when you need to. And it worked out. There's a little luck there obviously involved too for the deer to walk out 15 yards under our tree. But yeah, all good. So tagged out Minnesota. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and a good shot. I saw that video. He snuck it in there. Not a lot of room for error. So good shot by you. And then Connor knocked footage out of the park too. So overall, just great stuff.
Yeah, it's a cool story. So, that was a deer that we were pretty familiar with. We had reveal stuff of him the last 2 years. He was broke last year, and actually surprised me. I knew he was a really good deer, and one that I wanted to shoot, but score-wise, not that score's that big a deal, but surprised me. He was bigger than I thought, which was cool. So yeah, all good.
I heard it was a fun drag job too.
Oh, the drag job was rough. I'm going to tell you, you never think about how to get them out like before you shoot them, and like that's a good problem to have, right? Like you figure it out. But we went down there, and it was interesting. There, there was other good bucks there, and my lease partners are still hunting. And I told Connor, I'm like, let's jump down out of this tree, go down there, let's get a couple photos, do a recovery, and then get him out of here like slick. And we still had light left. I shot him at 5:45, and we went to move him, and it was like, we're not moving him. Like we had to come out and get some reinforcements, and we had a deer cart that we took in there and loaded him up on there, and that was a saving grace. But he kind of died down in this hell hole, and yeah, we got him out, so it was good. But yeah, so obviously some success, little different kind of stories. One, some more strategy to it. Other, just solid, some intel, but kind of going with your gut too, just being out there, setting up. You say you just went out there, but you had this kind of area set up, for success previously. So you spent a lot of work. You put a water hole in. Like there was a lot that went into that, other than just going out and hunting. Right. Conditions probably weren't ideal, obviously, but obviously ideal enough.
Yeah, I mean, everything was set up and working on moving all kinds of stands in the months prior, and had this spot, put hours into it with, the food plots and the clovers and adding a water hole and trimming, so a lot of work went into it. And then, I think back, this is the quickest hunt I've ever had, quickest season, we'll call it, for Wisconsin. And it's like, oh man, I just hung like 4 just prime stands and I'm not even going to use them. So put all that work into that, but I'm not going to complain. I mean, the way it all happened was kind of crazy, but no complaints. But yeah, 2 tags down. We got some tags left at the table. We got 3 Minnesota tags, Kansas tag, pre-rut coming. So who wants to jump into what's going to happen tonight? We're going to head out tonight in a couple hours.
Yep.
So well, before we jump into tonight, Brian, you've been hunting a little bit. Chris, I know you haven't been hunting as much.
Yeah,
what have you been seeing?
Probably, every 3 days for the last 2 weeks, just checking my weather patterns and getting out on the days that I need to. Been seeing a lot of deer, but the younger bucks have been kind of dominating the area right now. And over the course of the last 3-4 days, last 3 days especially, we've had our historical data, I guess, reoccurring on what time they show up at our property. And they are showing up now, all nighttime photos for the most part. We've got 2 that are daylighted, but our shooter bucks or our target bucks are now coming back into the property and really making their presence known, hitting scrapes, rubs, really all over the property on just about all of my cameras that are showing scrapes and rubs within the view. And yeah, I'm going to be focused on 2 bucks in particular, and hopefully get to cross paths with one of them. But yeah, I've had a bunch of 3-year-olds that, have really good potential for the next coming years, which is nice to see because I can kind of gauge their, 1, personality and how they utilize our property for upcoming years, and 2, kind of the dominance level. That I've showed you guys the no route 8-pointer, really tall and wide, but he's really pushed everybody off of the property as far as the 1, 2, and some of the 3-year-olds, and he's making his presence known. But now that the big boys are showing up, he's going to be getting kicked out of there within the next couple of days, I'm sure of.
So, Chris, headed out to the stand tonight. Have you ever seen the movie, I don't know, with kids or whatever, The Good Dinosaur?
I have. While ago.
So Mike and JJ have obviously shot bucks off of the Whitetails from Scratch property. This year is Chris's year, and in the Good Dinosaur, that's the thing. Like there's these baby dinosaurs that are born, and they all have their jobs, and they all get to, when they do a good job or they finally leave their make an accomplishment, they leave their mark. And I feel like this is it. Like Chris is ready to make his mark on the totem pole there. But so what do you got going on, like strategy wise? Talk to me about the sit tonight and just the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I've been on a couple times last week and again last night. Pretty good for me actually, considering this time of year. I'm so busy with, the operation side of things and stuff like that. So I've been putting a lot of work in actually getting ready for this year and focusing on getting some more time in this year. So the stage is set for me to get out there and actually put the time in that's needed. That's usually the biggest problem for, me not getting my mark up there yet is
I just not ready and to get the time in that I need to get in there. But no, so we're pretty ready on that, pretty dialed in. Like I said, been out there because we've been trying to, gather some pretty good footage and stuff. A little teaser here, but we got some stuff coming up for next year. So we're working on getting it primed for, a new release, just so you can get excited out there, guys. So we've been putting some time there and, relatively slow, but we're seeing deer and stuff like that. But yeah, a little excited. I don't know if it's a little earlier than last year. We'd have to look at the time frame and stuff like that. But a deer I had the first encounter with at the property out of all of us last year popped up on a camera again in the same spot he did. The night I saw him, he was on our trail camera, the same trail camera that night.
Historical data.
Historical data.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if we're a couple weeks earlier or not, but either way, it's right around that time because this is usually the only window I get out. The next couple weeks is my big window usually. So, yeah, we're going to try and get on tonight. So, I guess I got a little historical data with this guy too. So, hopefully that's something.
Well,
Yeah, and kind of what we've been seeing, because I've been with Chris a couple times filming, is like a lot of does coming out. They've been the last couple of nights getting super skittish and like does chasing fawns, like does fighting each other, running around, like they've been just super weird.
I've seen a lot of that.
We had a dozen does just come running out of the valley in through the food plot and just scurry out out of nowhere.
Which normally you're like, okay, is it coyote or is it a buck back there pushing? I think there was buck back there pushing last night. A lot of does came out, and there's coyotes in there too, so maybe a little bit of both. But yeah, young bucks are working, bumping does. We've seen some good, 3-year-old bucks and stuff, filming them and having good hunts. And now finally, just like we've been waiting for, big boys showing back up. So kind of changes the whole dominance hierarchy. And now it's time to make a move. So going with the gut, and we'll see what happens tonight.
The one thing I'll say about Chris is his preparation this year compared to years previous. The guy's been over at my shooting range every other day for the last 2 weeks shooting his bow. He's dialed in and ready to rock. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's we're in that last week of October, that golden week, and it's starting to really happen, and you can see it happen, and everybody. When does it happen? And you can, if you're running, reveals or you're out there, like you can start to see that shift. So 2 things, like my reveals just the other day, 2 days ago, like the other target buck that was there with the buck I shot, he's one of the older deer on our farm, and he has been destroying one side of our property, daylight, like he's chasing deer around. You can see it. So obviously we're not near peak rut yet, right?
Right.
Like we're just getting into that pre-rut phase,
Yep.
but like it's starting to jump off. We were over filming at Homegrown Outfitters in Wisconsin this past week, and we really saw it yesterday. We saw a ton of chasing. 3 days ago there was a guy in there, and they run a lot of cameras, right? So they have a pretty good idea of what deer are on their property. But again, we can not throw that intel out the window this time of year. But he's sitting there at 9:30 in the morning. 174-inch 10-pointer walks in front of him and he shoots it, and like they had no idea this deer was there as a bonus buck. Talk about an awesome bonus buck. Like this thing was a stud. But like we're into that time of year where it's starting to get really good. You're going to sit out there, you're going to see little bucks chasing, and those bigger bucks are now going to start to make their appearance and make themselves known. It's getting good. So it's just a matter of being out there at this point. It'll be interesting to see what happens here in the upper Midwest, because the weather is not going to be ideal. Like, and I think that's a lot of the around the country. Like I'm going to Kansas next week, and it's going to be mid to high 70s all week. So we'll see what happens with that. But again, it's that time of year where like those are still going to come in. Now, are they going to do more chasing at night? Sure, that happens if it's warmer, but like deer are still going to be on their feet. It's the time of year where you'd like to have cold weather, but
yeah, and it's not horrible. If we're in the 60s or something, that's not like we're, baking the deer in the 80, 90s, so they're still going to move.
Well, and the other thing that's really popping things off right now, especially in the upper Midwest, is crops are coming down last week and this week. Almost all the fields are getting hit right now by the farmers. That's pushing a lot of these deer that have been feeling comfortable in those crop fields for the last couple months out into the timber now. So we're seeing a lot more new bucks, and kind of to go back onto the historical data, these bucks are showing up within a week of each other every year. Year after year, that's when they come onto these different properties where they feel comfortable for their breeding areas. I don't know what it is, but they have a schedule in their head where they will come back on certain windows, and that's what we've been seeing on every one of our shooters now. I mean, within 2-3 days of the year previous.
Well, I think it makes sense, right? These big bucks, they go through multiple breeding seasons and they're smart, right? Like they know, I truly believe an older deer knows typically where that first doe is going to come into heat.
Unless she dies.
Right? But like they know where to go and look. And as deer get older, I'm not saying older deer don't chase, because they absolutely do. But you don't see them just going buck wild starting early and then chase throughout the whole entire rut. And like they're smarter, right? It's the old bull versus young bull mentality. You see all these 2-3-year-olds that run around like crazy trying to get anything they can. Those older bucks, they know kind of where to look for those first does come in. They also know where to take them when they're going to breed them. And we see that a lot. Like they'll take them to those same spots year after year because it's secluded and they've just done it enough. It's experience. So look for that historical data this time of year. I mean, I think it's learned from going through those breeding seasons. And
I would recommend everybody to fall back on previous years' trail camera footage or photos just to give you a glimpse of where and when they're going to be showing up.
So strategy coming up here in the next days or week, like what are you looking for? Where are you looking to sit? Like what's your strategy?
You get some strategy.
Mm-hmm. Well, a little bit of strategy, and it's semi-wind based. I mean, with this warmer weather, I mean, up here we're typically when the warmer weather comes in, we get a little more heavier south wind. So that's going to push us to more of the northern edges of our property where it opens up on the northern edges of the field lines. And it kind of actually plays, I feel like, a little bit into our hand too, the way it's set up in the area right now, because in our area, most of the standing crop that's in is actually all right to the north edge of us. So that means if they're bedding in the properties and stuff in our area, following that wind, I mean, they got to move up to the north of us. And then once they get to the ag to north of us, there's not much for bedding or timber past that stuff. So all the bedding and timber is south of the ag. So, I mean, it kind of works in our favor along with the wind and where we know that they're going to be going to those heavier food sources. So that's kind of our strategy right now. Like I said, we're a little dictated by the conditions and the elements, but at the same time, it kind of works out to how the land is playing right now. And I feel like how the deer are moving and what they're doing.
Yeah, it's always nice when you get this pre-rut time and you get some north winds, some south winds, some west. You keep bouncing around. It looks like we're going to have south for like the whole week.
Yeah,
so
which isn't typical.
Fortunately, we have some fresh sits that we can bounce around to. Some good spots. But yeah, the deer have been the past week or so hitting some scrapes, hitting a little bit of green, but then they keep going to the ag and the cut beans from what we're seeing for the most part, and some corn. So we're going to be kind of focusing on that stuff a little bit more. It was kind of interesting when that buck showed up yesterday on camera, kind of back to Lemke's point. This buck's 6.5 years old. So when he comes in, he wasn't, chasing does and, getting all wild. He just kind of first video, kind of looking at the camera, going slow. Second video, it's a big scrape, like kind of a yearly primary scrape, you'd call it, under a crabapple tree.
Kind of a couple right there, I think.
Next picture, he's just still kind of standing there. He licked the branch a little bit. Then a 2-year-old comes up to him. He just sits there, and the 2-year-old kind of licks him and kind of smells him, and is a little bit cautious. And he doesn't even really move or react to that little buck at all. Like, he's just the dominant dude. And he came in. I'm gonna smell who's here. Hit the scrape, put a little bit of my scent down, then just slowly works. Just a casual walk off. It's not like, getting all wild, ramped up, chasing does and getting crazy. I think he's just kind of coming into the area, establishing, where his core is going to be, and those does are going to figure it out. And I don't think he's going to move.
No, he's
a
kind
lot.
Of had a habit the last couple of years of, I don't know the exact time he comes in, but it's usually right around that last week, October, early November. But this is a deer we literally don't see at all ever throughout the year until he shows up in the beginning of November, and then he's here the entire time all the way up until March, and his horns drop, and then we don't see him
drop
again.
somewhere else, and then he can just
that's the other thing. They don't drop with ours either. We see them, and all of a sudden just.
But scrapes have been super hot. I'm sure you're seeing it. I'm sure you guys are all seeing it. Scrapes are opening up like crazy. Like hunting that the next 7-10 days is that's your window. I mean,
Yep.
rattling, calling. Tyler, we just talked to him a little bit.
So I was going to ask you, so tonight's sit, you guys are going in there. Are you going to do any calling?
That's up to Chris. I'm just filming.
I will be. I've been, over the last couple weeks, I've been hearing the younger bucks fighting. And now that we've got these more mature bucks on the property, I definitely want to mimic that lighter sparring session of these 1 and 2 year olds fighting each other, to let the guys, or the big guys, know, hey, get up off your feet, come kick these guys out of your breeding area, and it's time to fight, you know.
Chris, what do you think? Calling tonight?
Yeah, potentially, but I don't think it's gonna be anything too aggressive or too
No.
crazy at this point. I did hear a grunt last night when a couple does got scurried off the ridge just out from us. So I know I think some of the younger ones are pushing them a little bit. And
Really focusing on the rub and scrape lines, though. Our property's getting thrashed, and it's been over the course of the last 3-4 days. Just walking in and out of the property, you see the new rubs, you see the new scrapes, and they're opening up huge. I mean, all the leaf litter's on the ground right now, and you can see how wide some of these scrapes are opening up.
Those testosterone levels are going through the roof, or starting to right now. You know, it's interesting. I filmed last night, and we had a buck come into the field, and he was the exact definition of a bully buck. This thing was wicked. Like, he's old, walks into the field, and the guy I was filming thought he had something wrong with his back legs. Like, they were giving out, because he was just like, he was doing that wobble, and like his back legs were like spread, and like almost, it looked like he was like going to be like paralyzed in his back. And he comes in the field, and he had a big 4-point side, and then he had like a 14-inch dagger on the other side, and that was it. And it was actually a sweet buck, like a deer that should be shot, because every single deer that came into that field, like, he would run everyone off. Obviously, he's chasing the does a little bit, but if a buck stepped into that field, he could be 200 yards away. And that deer right over to him, and every other deer was like, nope, out of there. Like, so I don't know what would have happened if another big buck would have came in there. It would have been interesting to see, but like any 3-year-old or younger deer that walked into that field, it was like, get out of my house. Strategy wise, I think in the next week, what I would be focused on up here in the Midwest is, if you're going to hunt mornings, get into those spots where deer are going to be, you think bucks will be cruising, looking for does, like these big ridges, these secluded spots. If you can get in there, I think it's time to kind of get in there. They're starting to cruise. Now, they're not chasing yet, right?
Yep.
But that's where I would be, is in the timber in the mornings. In the evenings, what I would focus on is these bigger destination social areas. Now, if you can get on a scrape line, because if you walk these areas, like, there's going to be scrapes on these tree lines. But you get into those areas where does are going to be. And I feel like we talked about this last night sitting there. Like, you have deer start piling in there early, your chances are really, really good. Because I feel like the bucks, again, they know where all the deer are, and that's where they're going to be, right? So they're going to come out there, and they're going to start checking. So like in the evenings, I'm going to where the majority of the deer are. And, you know, then banking on, okay, I'm sitting over a scrape or whatever, but those bigger bucks are going to start making those daylight appearances where all those does are, where all the deer are. So I'm looking at my property and saying, okay, where have all the deer been? Like, not even the big bucks, like, where have they been? Even if the big bucks show up there at night, or even if they're somewhere else, I'm going to where all the deer are, does especially, because those big bucks are going to go there here this week and start checking that out. That's kind of my strategy on it. Now, as we shift into the following weeks, like as we start getting into that chase phase, I might get in there in the timber, pay attention to where those bucks want to take those does then, and spend the majority of the day in there. But like right now, this next week, hunting maybe some of those spots in the morning, and then I'm going to where all the deer are in the evening.
Yep.
As long as you can get in and out. Yeah,
True.
that's huge.
When I think
Those does get a little bit. I don't like big groups of does. They always.
we'll have an interesting hunt tonight, because we're kind of hunting a new spot we've never hunted before. It's an area we've never had. I don't know, like, just probably not a great spot to really set up on it. But actually, now I'm thinking about it, historically, it's probably one of the spots and areas we've had some of the most historical data of this specific buck that we have seen in the past. So that actually could have some promise to it. But like I said, hunting on this north side of the property. It's not a side of the property that last year was our first time hunting it. So unlike, we get our predominant north winds here, our north and our west winds, and we've been hunting the southern side because we've owned that chunk of the land a lot longer too. I mean, that's pretty well set up and established, and we have good history with it. But now we're actually, have a year deep into learning kind of how that northern side's worked. And now we got some new areas in there that we get to hunt and really kind of get more aggressive on it. So it'd be interesting to seeing how that plays out as well.
Yeah, and kind of the switch up we did this year because there's not a good stand location yet. There's probably some options, but we put a redneck ghillie blind in there, prepped it, weeks ago, aired it out for a couple weeks, put it in there. Should be pretty solid access in and out. Not big ag next to it, but around the area there's some big ag, but we'll be looking at a little green plot. We got a hemp rope hanging down, which, the big buck hasn't hit yet, so we don't know how he's going to react if he gets there, but it'll be interesting to see. We'll film it. It's more of like a trend. There's been a lot of does in there too, and small bucks. There's a lot of doe traffic there, and just easy in and out.
Food source between bedding and where the bigger ag fields are. So
yeah, I'm hunting timber tonight in between two food sources. So, and it's absolutely, like I was saying, thrash with rubs and scrapes. That's where every doe pumps out into either one of the two fields, and it's a really good kind of funnel area that comes off of these high ridges where those bucks are bedding all day long.
Great time of year for calling. Like, we're getting into those short amount of days where I think like blind rattling, can be really, really effective. Use your extinguisher. Like I wouldn't go to the woods without it right now. Your extinguisher and your black rack. I would feel lost because I feel like there's a really good opportunity to call two deer to close that distance. But I will say this, make sure that think about the calling that you're doing and think about the illusion or the picture that you're trying to create, right? So if it's a buck chasing a doe or, a doe, a buck, two bucks fighting, think about what you're doing and try to communicate with the deer. Again, there's tons of instructionals out there, calling instructionals on the Deer Society app or Deer Society YouTube. But we were sitting, not very often do you get in a scenario where it's like, okay, you get to hear like what the hunter sounds like, right? You call and you think you're calling a certain way, and then like you don't get the deer's perspective. Well, we were hunting, and the neighbor was in there, and they were calling, and they were rattling, and I knew right away that it wasn't two bucks fighting. Like they took their horns and they were cracking them together, and it was just like nonstop for 2 minutes, just boom, 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 like not even a pause in there. And it was like right away you pick off, okay, well that's not two bucks for sure. And so if we're picking that up, you can bet deer are picking it up. So
absolutely,
when you're calling, it's a great time to call, but make sure you're doing it. Like think about that picture that you're trying to paint before you paint it.
I see a lot of people fall into the trap of calling every like 10, 15 minutes too. Don't overcall. And as to piggyback off what you're saying, taking breaks, especially when rattling, 5-10 seconds in between your intervals, it might last 2 minutes, but you're taking those breaks and it's not two sheep coming together in battle. And when these bucks are fighting, they're grinding, and you really want to mimic that sound. That's, where the black rack stands out over everything else on the market, because you can get those two full sets of antlers coming in contact with each other and really mimic that sound.
Yeah, and we always talk about climbing the ladder, with your volume. So if you are, just kind of feeling it out, blind calling, you could always start with just some grunts, wait a little bit, maybe some light sparring. Might not be a bad tactic, kind of work your way up. If nothing's happening, you don't think there's any deer real close, then you could be more aggressive. Keep it natural. You could just do some big slams and that's it. Or you can go a little bit longer, pause, just try to, paint that picture. So if a buck's sitting there listening, which they are, they're not typically just walking around all over the place, right. The big ones. They're listening a lot.
Last night I called in 3 bucks off one rattling sequence, and they're all in my lap within 5 minutes. So, it's keeping those lighter sessions, making that more community atmosphere. Hey, we're going to go check this out. I know I can, you don't want to unless you got a big mature buck to challenge, these are more sequences to say, hey, there's something going on out here, come check it out.
It's so interesting. Those big bucks, mature ones, are so methodical and so slow moving. Like, it's cool to see, and you don't get to see it most of the time because say you're hunting over a field and like a big buck steps out. All you see is that big buck stepping out. When I shot that deer the other day, it was cool to see that because when he came up to that field edge, he stood 5 yards inside the woods for 15 minutes and never moved. Like not even, he'd move his head real slow back and forth, and he's just watching and observing. And like we hear about that, right? But like you rarely get to see that. And I mean the carefulness that he took obviously wasn't careful enough. But like the caution that he took before he stepped into that field was intense. It was wild.
Yeah, and just like what I was explaining with that trail camera video of this mature buck we're gonna target, real cautious. And then going back to Andre, the buck I shot, I have footage of him. So when he came out that night on Friday, he actually came where I could just see him behind a little bit of a spruce tree, so I could see a little bit of rack, a little bit like I knew who he was right away. But he stood there, and I just filmed him, and he just stared at this clover plot in front of me, this tiny little plot, was rubbing his tarsals, and just sat there for 5 minutes, back and forth and back and forth. Didn't look around, like didn't try to see other deer, or it was just weird. He just stood there, didn't move his head. 5 minutes, tarsals, back legs, back and forth, and then finally came in. He just stood on the edge. It's just weird. Like a small buck would never do that. You just see him come right in.
Right.
But he was also bedded, 70 or so, 80 yards away. I heard him coughing. Didn't know it was him. So he was like, I was in the zone, and he was obviously within earshot of this plot all night too. So he was aware of what was going on. Finally got up early, wanted to come get a little drink, stood at the edge, just in on those tarsals, and here he come. Crazy.
Well, we're gonna cut this one a little short because Brian and Chris, you got to get out to the stand. But I want to touch on one thing that's completely off topic and just say one thing about it. When you shoot a deer, please, please, please exercise caution. Like when you go and get them. So like, if it's a marginal shot, leave them. We just had an experience the other day again, and it happens. Everybody gets excited, even if you think it's a good shot. Like there's so many times that like there's so little room for error. And like, if you bump a deer, like it makes your job of retrieving him so much tougher. So like, just before you just dive in there and go get him, like just take a step back and really give that deer some time. And you might see him fall over, and that's a different story. Or you might absolutely crush him, and it's a different story. You never want a deer to sit too long and whatever, but just think about where the shot is. And, if he's hitting the liver, he's hitting one lung, or he's hitting the guts, like just give him time. You're going to find him probably.
If you don't bump him.
So like, just think about that. Hopefully when you shoot one here in the coming weeks, just because we've seen it so much. And I just saw it the other day again, just exercise that caution, err on that side of giving him some time. So
yeah.
That being said, we're going to wrap this up. We got bucks to kill. Good luck tonight, Chris. You're going to have fingers crossed for you. I think it's going to be sweet. New bucks on their feet, showing up. It's that time of year where anything can happen. So, guys, thanks for listening. Good luck out there. Hunt Breakdown's rocking and rolling right now. We're going to try to put some more on that board over there tonight. But check those out on Deer Society YouTube. If you haven't done so, make sure you download the free Deer Society app. Lots of good calling instructionals on there. Tactics that you can use right now that can maybe make you a little more successful. So thanks for tuning in. Good luck out there in the woods, and hopefully we're back again here in a week or so with some more success on the table.
Well, I'm a deer hunting man. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the Phase Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Osseo Gear, Hooyman, and Big Frig.